So now that I have my object, my subject, in this case I'm using a rabbit for my subject. Now that I have the profile to the size I want it, and I have planned out my different layers, I'm going to now start with the body. So I'm going to take this profile and I'm going to cut out or trace over this profile of just the body onto my cardboard. So there's two ways I can do this. I can cut along the outside silhouette of the body of my rabbit and lay it on the cardboard and trace around it, or I can take a soft leaded pencil such as a 6B and I can color in behind the rabbit. So what I'm doing is I'm holding it up so I can see where the rabbit body is, and if I can't see that by just lifting it up like this, I can always hold it up to the light. But I'm just going a little bit larger than what the rabbit body is, because when I trace this over I want to make sure I have graphite in that area. So I'm just going to kind of give myself an idea of where I want to color in, and then again using a soft pencil like a 6B, I'm going to color this in so I can make my own carbon paper. Now if you have carbon paper, you are more than welcome to use it. So I'm going to color this in and demonstrate the next part. So what I've done is just color in where the line for my rabbit's outline will fall. So I don't need to fill in the center because there's nothing there I'm going to be transferring over to my cardboard. I'm not worried about the ears, the arms, the legs, or the tail at the moment because those are all going to be pieces added on a little bit later. So right now I'm just going to concentrate on the main body of my subject. So what this does is the soft graphite leaves a lot of dust on the surface of the paper, so that when I go to trace this over, I'm going to lay down my cardboard I'm going to lay my paper on top, and then when I use a pencil or a pen to trace over this, that pressure is going to cause the carbon from the graphite. It's going to cause the graphite to stick to this surface, and that will transfer over the shape of my rabbit. So I'm looking to make sure I have some fairly flawless areas. If this piece of cardboard was completely flawless, I would of course move this as far over as possible. But I'm trying to watch because I do have a little dent over here in the cardboard. So I'm going to try to get as close to that so I'm not wasting too much cardboard, but not have that in my sculpture. So now that I have that lined up, I'm going to take a pen and just trace over this outline. So I went over that a couple of times because the corrugations cause the pencil or pen to kind of bounce around a little bit. But you can see where the soft graphite now sticks to the cardboard. So now I can cut out this body for my sculpture. So now that I have my body cut out, it is now time to start tracing over my various levels of my sculpture and tracing them onto cardboard also. So just like when I traced my profile onto the cardboard, my first step is to prep this piece of paper. So again, what I did was on the back, gave myself a rough outline that was slightly larger than the size of my image. And once again used a soft graphite pencil, a 6B, to color over. And this time I filled in the whole shape because it wasn't just the outline of the frontal view, but I had all the layers of my pieces that I'm going to have to trace. So now that I have that paper prepped, I'm going to now once again take this, lay it on top of pieces of cardboard, trace over the shape I want, and complete that onto several pieces of cardboard. And I'm going to label as I trace over these images. So anything that's for the head, I'm going to label as layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and so forth. Anything that's part of the torso, again, layers 1, 2, 3, as I trace them over. And then that even goes for whenever I make my way to the back view and trace it, I will once again prep the piece of paper just as I did the profile and just as I did the frontal view here, and that is to color in the back with the 6B pencil so that I can then easily trace over the shapes for my many layers on the back part of the sculpture. So here is my collection of pieces. So I know it's a little hard to see because we are on cardboard. But hopefully you can see that I have traced over my parts. I've labeled them, so like these are for the front parts of the legs. These get into then the front parts, sorry, the full legs. And I have all my shapes here for the other areas, for the arms, more leg parts, and into the tail. I have my profile of my arms and my legs traced over. Let me see if I turn off that light if it's easier to see. It's a little dark, but it's easier to see the lines now. So I have the profile views of my arms and legs, and you of course saw most of the tracings of the body parts. So I haven't cut any of these out. So now this is going to be my next step, is that I am now going to cut these pieces and assemble at the same time. So to begin the assemblage, I'm going to take my profile piece and lay it back over top of my drawing that's on the grid. And I'm going to create the vertical lines I need so I know where to glue this material. So since this is a pretty large area, I'm going to mark where I see the graph lines touching at the cardboard, and then I'm going to use a ruler to line up these marks and to get some lines here so that as I cut materials out, I can start assembling. So now that I've worked my way around the outer edge here, I'm going to grab my ruler and I'm going to create my vertical lines. And I want to make sure I do this with a sharpened pencil. And I want these lines because all of my measurements for the height of the pieces are based on those vertical lines in the grid. So this is going to help me place each of my pieces that I cut out when I go to assemble. It's going to allow me to have them in the proper place. So now that I have my vertical lines on there, as I cut my pieces, now I know where to attach them. So I also had to make that same set of lines on the back here, and I'll be ready to start cutting and assembling. Okay, so I have my vertical lines on my body, both back and front. As you saw already, I have all my parts traced onto cardboard. So now I'm ready to start cutting. So again, if you are using scissors, please take your time. It's going to take a little bit more thought and trimming with scissors than it will with a craft knife. And if you're using a craft knife, then you want something to protect your table, so you don't have to necessarily buy a cutting mat. I've used at home myself, when I don't have a cutting mat, a piece of wood or even another piece of cardboard, but you want something that's going to protect your work surface. If you're working at a workbench in which you don't mind if cuts get into it, then you probably wouldn't need something to cover your surface, but I always feel best if I cover my work surface. You're also going to need your craft knife, so I'm just using an X-Acto knife, and of course you're going to need your cardboard pieces. So all I'm going to do is select one of my drawn out cardboard pieces and start cutting out parts of my rabbit and attaching them to the main body. So now that you've watched me cut out a few pieces, I'm ready to start attaching them to my profile. So as I had mentioned before, I put the vertical lines on my profile, both sides, and then this gives me an idea of where I need to glue my cardboard pieces that I am starting to cut out to assemble my sculpture. So you can see here I've already cut some out and attached them, and now I'm going to work on attaching this pile of pieces that I've just cut out. So what I do is I take my pieces and I'm going to once again need my plan page, and if I have any little numbers or notes written on these, I'm going to erase those little marks, and I'm going to lay this onto the piece, and I'm going to just mark where that vertical line that goes through the piece is located, and I'm going to do that for each of my pieces. So now that I have these marked, I'm going to use my straight edge to draw my vertical line. Now that I have the line drawn, I'm going to use my craft knife and I'm going to cut this in half. So whenever I can, I want to also use my straight edge to try to keep this cut as straight as possible. And just like any time you work with a craft knife, you don't want to try to go through all the layers at once. It's going to take several cuts to make your way through. So have some patience when you're doing any of your cutting. So as you can see there, the smaller pieces are a little bit more difficult to cut, especially on this split. This one, it kind of came apart. The corrugation obviously didn't have a place to attach to there, so I'm just going to add a little bit of glue there to reconnect that little piece in the back. But now that I have these cut and split in half, I'm ready to start assembling them. So let me glue that little piece back together, and then I'll demonstrate to you how you attach it to your profile. So I'm going to use Elmer's glue to attach mine. You can use hot glue for this. Just be very careful. You want this to look as neat and as clean as possible. So you don't want a lot of excess glue showing, or how it will create those strings and so forth. So you want to make sure that you are carefully applying whatever glue you do choose. So I'm going to start by attaching these little pieces to the front area here of the chest. And what I do is just put a little bit of glue on the end of my cardboard, thin it out a little bit, and line it up to that vertical line. So this will take a little bit of patience. And then I like to check it from the top. I want to try to get it as straight up and down here as possible. So I don't want it bending to the front. I don't want it bending backwards. I want to try to get it as much of a vertical line here. So I will look at it from the top down and make adjustments. And then I like to find a place where I can prop it. And for me, I just kind of prop it up against my camera base here. And I can do that for now because I don't have too much down in this area. These are dry, so I can start resting them on areas, but anything that's going to be fresh, wet glue, I want to watch where I place it because I don't want to break anything off. So I'm going to go ahead and attach the other side here. And I check to see if it is in line with the one on the left side or right side of the body. It'd be the rabbit's right side of the body, but when I look at it, it's the left when he's facing me. And again, I just want to check to make sure it's as in line as possible to those vertical lines and to the piece already attached on the other side. So that is how I'm going to assemble these halves. I do let one part set up a little bit before I attach the next, but I don't wait for it to completely dry. I just know I have to be careful that as I'm attaching, that these parts are still wet, they're still drying. But by me putting on a little bit of glue and thinning it out, it will allow it to start bonding a little bit faster than if I had a large amount of wet glue there. So I'll attach a couple more pieces. I won't be attaching all of them today because I of course don't have them all cut out yet. As you saw, I only got parts of the head and parts of the body back cut out so far. But it should be enough of a demonstration for you to get an understanding of what it is your next step is to complete your sculpture. So this part I'm going to let set up a little bit longer. As you saw, I already had it collapse once on me. And that's part of this project. You have to have a little bit of patience. As much as I would love to keep on adding and adding and adding, because I'm working around these other areas that are still slightly damp, I need to, take a little break, let this set up a little bit longer before I start trying to attach anything in behind it, because I'm going to end up bumping this and it's already taking a little bit of time to attach, that I would feel comfortable enough that if I bumped it, it would not fall off or come apart. So I'm going to take a small break. I'll be back to start attaching some other pieces as we move further back the sculpture. But just remember, every once in a while you have to stop, give parts that you've attached a little bit of time to set up and glue down before moving on. So this is as far as I got with the pieces I have cut out. So obviously these last few are still drying. But hopefully that is enough of a demonstration to help you understand the next steps of your project. So once you have all your pieces traced onto your cardboard, if you hadn't already, you want to cut out your profile. You want to apply vertical lines. Use the page with your grid on it to apply those vertical lines. So that the pieces that you use these vertical lines to determine the height, when you trace them in the width, they are based on that measurement, on this height measurement. So for this to work, for it to line up onto these pieces from top to bottom, you need to make sure that you are using the same grid method. So apply the grid to both sides of this profile, and as you cut out pieces, begin attaching them. So I went through 2 sheets of my cardboard that had these pieces on it and cut them out. Then I once again lined up the pieces on this plan to get to my vertical center point, drew that on there, used an X-Acto knife and ruler to help cut along that vertical edge to cut this in half, and then of course glued it to both sides of the profile. Again, I can't stress enough, it doesn't hurt to take a little break once in a while to give time for parts to set up so that there's less likely or less chance of you damaging it and getting frustrated. It will take some patience. Again, you can use Elmer's glue, you can use some sort of craft glue, you can use hot glue. Just try to make sure it's as clean as possible. So that's why, while this is still slightly damp, anything I can reach that I see some extra glue coming out, I am just using my fingernail there to kind of scrape it up and clean it up some. So I will, of course, over the next few days continue working on mine and finishing up the rest of the body. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more pieces to the body itself, and then I will start working on the legs and the arms. I'll cut out the profiles of those, I'll cut out the pieces, attach them, and then I'll eventually attach the legs to the rabbit and the tail and eventually the ears. So that is the process for creating this armature sculpture using cardboard. And as I add more pieces to mine, I will of course update or upload a updated video so you can see the progress of mine as it's being made.